Welcome back to the Raw Christian Men's Podcast, a place for authentic, real-life discussion on faith, masculinity, and living as a Christian man in today's world. On this episode, we're discussing Christianity and politics. As usual, at the little engineer desk, we have Luke Rude. How you doing, Luke?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Did you have a good Christmas, New Year, all that stuff?
Yeah. You?
Not terrible. It's busy, traveling a lot. So, you guys go anywhere?
No, we just stayed here.
Stayed here? All right. Kind of a boring break then, huh?
Yeah, it was worth it.
That's good. Get a little bit of time off. So we also have another guest with us today. It's actually Luke's dad, Bruce. How you doing, Bruce?
I'm doing well. You?
I'm doing all right. How was your holiday?
It's good.
Good? Refreshing time off?
I had a few days off.
A few days off?
Just a few.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself? Introduce yourself.
Bruce Rude. I'm 55 years old. I went to Lewis Cass, grew up around here, grew up a mile and a half west of Galveston. We currently live east of Galveston. So we're still
Close
chewing
to
some
home.
of the same dirt.
Yeah.
Been a policeman for 29 and a half years. Most of those as an investigator of some sort, 10 years undercover, former SWAT. Just kind of jack of all trades and master of none.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
So as a public servant, you are all too familiar with the political atmosphere then.
A lot.
So
Yes.
This would be a good topic for you to chime in. So as we get into Christianity and politics today, and I figured this would be a good topic because today, as of the time of this recording, it is January 6th, 2024. So we just had the certification of the January 26th, 2025. I still am not used to the new year yet. So we just had the certification of the 2024 election today. And then we have on the 20th, the inauguration of President Donald Trump. So it can go without being said that the political environment has been pretty heated, probably, I don't know, the last decade.
Yes, for sure.
So, and I think that can be a very uncomfortable topic for some people to talk about. And we just want to touch base and kind of show that we can still have the tough discussions without the awkwardness or without the tension or the combativeness. So, challenge of politics and Christians. Like I said, it's already a very sensitive and divisive topic, mainly because when we're talking to somebody, especially like it could be somebody we've been friends with or acquaintances with for quite some time, we don't necessarily know their political background. So I know for me, I tend to try to tap dance around certain topics or kind of walk on eggshells because I don't necessarily want to offend anybody, but part of it, like I don't necessarily care, but I don't want to just outwardly be abrasive, I guess.
I guess a lot of that too depends on the environment you're at. I mean, if you're, for me, if I'm at work, obviously we kind of keep our opinions to yourself because you never know who you're going to offend. Even at church, even though we're a church family, if you bring up certain topics or bring up certain things, you may offend somebody you don't even know.
And we've had people leave. I mean, it's been a while, but we've had people leave the church because a political topic might have been brought up during a sermon, or somebody might have posted something on Facebook that they didn't agree with. So they've gotten so upset that we've left the church for it.
I think used to you could, especially around here, you could pretty much, there was a time where you could say what you thought or what you believed, and there were no repercussions for it. Now it seems like this political climate these days, if you risk offending somebody, that's a whole new topic. I mean, people leave church, people quit communicating with their families, and unfriend people over who they supported in the last election, and it's kind of gotten to a complete extreme now. And I have some friends I have friends and family. Some of them are very liberal, and we're still very, very close. I love them to death. We're good friends. We just don't talk politics.
Yes. I think one of the things we want to kind of get across is that it's okay to disagree with somebody, but you don't necessarily need to like cut somebody completely out of your life because of a disagreement or because they don't necessarily align politically with your views or your worldview. We need to just get back to that. We kind of talked off air about that. Where it wasn't, it's been a while, I think, but there was a time when you could have these hard talks or had these hard discussions and you just kind of, agree to disagree. You could have like knockdown dragouts and then go and hang out with somebody and have a beer with them and be just fine. But we need to get back to those days, I think. It's just, there's a lot of overly sensitive people and they're too willing to just burn bridges over a certain comment or a certain disagreement or whatever it might be. And I don't know, we're just too thin-skinned as a society.
I agree, but you can kind of take that back a little bit to the days when you had to earn something. Not everybody got a trophy, and there was not always a participation trophy at the end of a season, and you actually had to work for stuff. And once we started kind of making it where everybody's equal and everybody's the same, and then when you do that, there's no special people in the world. And when there's no special people in the world and everybody's equal, the minute you start saying I'm different because I view my world different than you, then people now get offended by that.
Yeah. Now, and I know for me, I'm not sure, because I was thinking about this, I'm not sure if it was just because everything started to shift politically around the time that I joined the military, or if it's just because of the area I grew up. We're from a rural area of Indiana, and usually I think it would be safe to say that if you were in a rural community within Indiana, it's fairly conservative, or at least for the most part, a majority of the views politically will lean toward the conservative side. So that's the way that I was brought up. And I just assumed that everybody around me shared those same views. So when I left home for the first time and I'm going and I'm being surrounded by people with a lot more, I guess, diverse worldviews, it kind of was a little bit of a culture shock. Do you find that here within the community that that's starting to change? Like, are we not as, I guess...
I think some of it, too, has to do with the political parties themselves. A Republican's not a Republican from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And a Democrat's not a Democrat from 20 years ago. And there's really no definition of where you could say you're a Republican, and it comes with a stigmatism now that, what do you stand for if you, as a Republican versus you're a Democrat, but are you really a progressive liberal who identifies as a Democrat? Or are you a staunch conservative that's so far right, you can't even drive down the road straight because your views are so twisted that way. But there's no middle ground anymore. I think most people around here are still to this day, even though some will say they're Democrats, some will say they're Republicans, they're still in that middle ground.
Yeah. And I would say it's safe to say that most of America falls within that middle ground. They're either shading left or shading right. If you were to just go and talk to, like, I'm going to say just average Joe Schmo from wherever state you want to pick, more often than not, you're going to find some stuff that you agree with them. Probably not, not everything, guaranteed not everything, but you might agree with more of what they have to say or a little bit less than what they have to say or what they believe in, but you're going to agree with some stuff for the most part. So I think as a country, we still kind of live in that middle ground of, you're shading to the left or shading to the right. I feel that the minority that lives on the far left and the far right are so loud that that's what they're associating with as a Democrat or a Republican nowadays.
But also with the social media and news outlets, it's all about the clickbait now. It's all about what gets views and what people want to hear or think they want to hear, or what has the most controversy. If you throw a view out there, it's so far fetched that, you're so far left that half the country is like, I can't believe this idiot just said that. When the other, there's still those others that are like, oh yeah, I'd go for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, but it's all about who's your viewership. Like certain news networks, they're not going to put a staunch conservative on, and others aren't going to put a progressive liberal on, because that's not the audience. They want to entertain that audience. It's more of entertainment now, more than political views.
And I think there's a lot of people, they want to be surrounded by people they agree with. I don't know if it's because of uncomfortability, or if there's just that much distrust and dislike for somebody they don't agree with, but they want to be surrounded by people that they agree with or that share their worldview with. So they want to live in that little wind tunnel, or that bubble where everything that is being pushed to them, they 100% agree with. And then everything that's outside of that purview is it's 100% wrong.
But somewhere we got into that. And just because you don't agree, we can't have family.
No, I 100%.
We had a family member that just pretty much disappeared for 2 weeks after the election. They were so distraught.
Yeah.
I mean, just wouldn't even take a phone call. All because it was just so upsetting to them.
Yeah.
Why most people in this area was celebrating.
Yes.
And they're from here. They're from this area. But it took a couple weeks for they would even answer the phone.
Yeah. And
then I got a cousin I'm close to that's old school Democrat. My grandpa's Democrat. He's an older guy. He couldn't stand Trump. No matter what, he would never vote for Trump. No matter how bad Kamala Harris was in his eyes, he could never take himself to vote for Trump, all because he was a Republican. And that was the only reason. Not because he agreed or disagreed with this or that. It was just because he was a Republican. He would never vote Republican no matter what. And we talk 6 days a week. He's a great guy. And we poke at each other. He's one we can actually, I can say, well, thank God your gal didn't win. And he was like, yeah, well, we got to put up with your idiot for 4 years. So we kind of go back and forth, and then don't think anything about it. Just keep going on. But now I got some other friends that you don't even joke about it.
And kind of going back to what you were just talking about, I think that's something that we need to get away from as a country, is just the identity politics. Like, I associate with being a Republican, or I associate with being a Democrat or an independent, whatever it is. And you go and you get your ballot and your straight ticket. You don't care who's on it, your straight ticket. I'm voting for this guy because he's got an R next to his name, or because he's got a D next to his name. And I'm hating this other guy because they have that R, or they have that D. There's not enough people that are truly informed to be able to make that decision. They're just going strictly based off that R or that D. And I think identity politics is killing us as a country, and it's definitely keeping us from being able to have that conversation. Because as soon as you could be friends with somebody, not know, because I've seen this personally, people are friends with somebody, not knowing their political leanings. As soon as they find out that they have something, or they believe politically opposite of what they do, then they want to just write them off. Don't have anything to do with them. All because they had that R or that D next to their name. You liked them up until then. I mean, what's changed?
I knew some people that are that way.
And it's ridiculous in my mind. I think that's something that we definitely need to get away from as a country, is identity politics. It's killing us as a country. It's killing us from being able to actually have these tough conversations. I should be able to have a tough conversation with somebody who I don't agree with politically, but still be able to be cordial and be friendly with. I mean, it's
like you can't. It's kind of hard to put it in words, but like David, my cousin, we poke at one another, and I always remind him, hey, RFK was a Democrat. He's on Trump team. Hey, Donald Trump used to be a Democrat. Well, his response to that was, yeah, well, we kicked them all out. So we go back and forth. But when I tell another family member, hey, you remember Donald Trump was a Democrat at one point, that conversation's over. And where it comes into play is sometimes if you voice those, especially in my world, with politics, if you voice those outwardly to people and you offend the wrong people, there are consequences for that. I was the first policeman in our city's history ever assigned to a fire station. I literally for 2 years had to go to work at the number one fire station. And most of that was for political reasons. I offended the current mayor at the time, which he knows and I know. I really don't care that he was offended. And but I had an R with me and he had a D with him, and we're actually related. But it didn't do wonders for my career for a few years. But fire department wasn't that bad either.
Yeah.
So,
and I think as we get back on topic with the faith side of it, as Christians, do you think it's a little bit tougher for us to have those conversations than if, say, like our non-Christian counterparts?
I think so. I think if you're talking about building the church and expanding the ministry, and I think once you bring politics into that, you shut certain people out. If everybody was in the church was the same, it would honestly probably be a little bit boring if we all had the same opinion, did the exact same thing every day. But having that diversity in there, I think would help. It does help. But at the same time, if you let politics take control of the church, I think that could hurt you in the long run.
And I think
probably push people away.
And we're already seeing that in some churches where you can see where it's ultimately getting more politically aligned than it is religiously aligned. I mean, have you seen that before?
Oh yeah.
So
our church, we went to a pretty strict Baptist church, and it was, there was no doubt, there was never a question whether the preacher was a conservative or a Democrat, or there was 100% former fighter pilot. I mean, he was pretty far right, and he let you know it. And it didn't matter to him who he offended. And there was times, even though I am a conservative, or claim to be, there was times that he would say stuff from the pulpit that I would literally just go, ooh, probably shouldn't have said that. That's going to ruffle some feathers. And I would look around the congregation and think, well, I wonder how many of the auto workers he just offended.
Yeah.
Because, the unions were traditionally Democrats. And he was kind of preaching off topic a little bit, and I know it probably offended some people. And then here, I couldn't tell you if Bill was a Democrat or Republican. And I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah. And that goes to the next point that I was wanting to bring up is like when I was preparing for this episode, one question that I was kind of sticking into my mind was like, does faith determine our politics, or does our politics determine our faith? Like, so in other words, are we taking what we believe is true from Christianity, from the Bible, and applying it to our political worldview? And is that determining how we vote or who we follow? Or are we more concerned, excuse me, or are we more, do we identify more with a political party or ideology, taking that worldview and letting it shape what we believe is spiritually?
I think it all depends on how you view the world. It's no secret under the last few administrations, there's off and on, there's a lot of violence. And the violence, some of the rhetoric that was going on politically through one party in particular was almost pushing for that violence. But then you get the other party comes along, the conservative party, the Republicans, and then you get to January 6th, and now they're pushing that same narrative about the violence and where it's going. And I say that because our world has gotten more evil. And I see that. I see that daily. We live in an extremely evil world. A lot worse than it used to be. 29 years ago, there was, you think about it, 29 years isn't that long, but that was before cell phones, before social media. And what you was taught in school mattered, and what you taught by your parents mattered, and what you learned at church mattered. Now it seems like most people get their information and their knowledge from a computer screen or a cell phone. And I think sometimes those politically they can be charged in a certain manner to kind of induce the violence. I don't know how old you are, but some of us older 80s graduates from Lewis Cass remember when there was a rap band that was arrested on stage in Florida because they were vulgar. They were arrested for disorderly conduct. Now it's on everyday radios in your car.
Yeah.
For the same stuff they were arrested for saying.
Yeah.
We've just changed, and we've accepted that evilness. And I think a lot of that has to do with the political feel of the day. If the political climate is in charge that wants to, whoever, and it's not just Democrats and it's not just Republicans. Mm-hmm. It's both. When we started making, we have enough laws to protect ourselves from ourselves. I'll be the first to tell you that. But when you just start doing away with things and turning a blind eye to stuff, and I can remember a time my neighbor would whip me if I was out of line. Now, if your neighbor yells at you, they call the police on you. Mm-hmm. It's just things have changed, and I think some of that has to do with the political climates over the years, how they've changed. There was a time that good people wouldn't stand by where they burned the entire city down. People would rise up and defend their own homes. Nowadays, it's all over the news, and people are anxious to sit at home and watch it burn. Mm-hmm. When did that change, and why?
I think it goes back to what you were just saying. Like, we are, as a society, it's more evil. There was just, last week, a lady was set fire on a subway, and yes. I believe in New York, right?
In New York, yep.
People's first instinct was to take out their cell phone and record the event rather than try to help put out the fire or save the lady's life.
And the second thing they did was scream that it was an illegal immigrant.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's an evil person that did evil things.
Yes.
In our own home.
Mm-hmm. And that say the exact same thing for, I would say, a vast majority, if not all, like mass shooting events. The very first thing that happens is, can we turn this and spin this and make it into a political event? Rather than let's have the tough conversation of what are some real things that we can actually do to try to alleviate this issue from happening. Nobody wants to have, they want to say what they think the issue is, but they don't want to listen to any other possible solutions other than, let's ban all guns. Or, if there's, say what the far right was, I don't know what the far right would be. It's just like, we're not going to do anything. It's just mental health.
I give you one, you want to take them all. That's their view. If I give up my army tank, you're going to take my pistol. That's the far right view.
Yeah. And we're so quick to take tragedies and spin it into a political event that we can't sit there and have that hard discussion to where we can actually find some real answers of how we can keep it from happening again. Because I mean, yes, we do have mental health issues that contribute to these, people. Sane people don't set people on fire. Sane people don't go into buildings and shoot up dozens of people. Yes, it's a mental health issue, but we also need to be willing to protect the people until we address the mental health issue. And so but we don't want to have those conversations. We just want to keep pointing out the problems. So I think it just kind of goes back into the politics part of it, but
it's, I don't know if you know where. I know exactly where it was on 9/11. Mm-hmm. I was on the second floor of the police station. We had an office there, and our IT guy, it was kind of funny now when you look at IT. Our IT guy was a grouchy old guy that cussed like a sailor and smoked like a chimney, because they could actually smoke inside the building then. And he yelled out, "Oh my goodness, look what just happened." And I remember the entire second floor of our department watching that happen and watching that second plane fly in. And it was, I don't know if you know what the world did then, if you can remember, mm-hmm. but it was 9/11 and the world prayed.
Yeah. Our
police department prayed for a community that's hundreds of thousands of miles, a long way away.
Yeah.
I don't know how far New York City is, but it's a long plane ride. I know that. It's even longer when you drive it because we've done it. But we prayed for those people. Even the grouchy old guy at our IT guy, he was the first one that wanted to lead us in prayer and said, we need to pray for these people. Mm-hmm. It kind of brought our country together as a whole. And as Christians, we prayed. Everybody prayed. But where we've gone from there to now is completely opposite. We just had this tragedy in New Orleans the other day.
Yeah.
The football game last night, they had a moment of silence. They didn't have a prayer for those people. They had a moment of silence because I guess it could be considered the same thing. But back in our younger days, we would have a prayer for them. There would have been somebody there on the microphone saying a prayer for the people in New Orleans. Now they get a moment of silence. So where does that change? Why did that change? And what's the political? And there's been Republicans and Democrats in office since 9/11.
Yeah.
So you can't blame one party or the other. But if you look at society as a whole, we've gotten away from the church, and we've gotten away from the Christian beliefs, and we've gotten away from prayer.
And even if you don't subscribe to a Christian worldview, you can't deny that if you were to take what Christians believe from the Bible, like how we should treat each other, you can't say or look at that and then say that if we applied that as a society that it would turn out to be a negative. You cannot do it.
There's no way.
There's no way. And I do remember I was in high school when September 11th happened, and we were actually taking our state graduation qualification exam or whatever. They waited until after we were finished taking our test for the day before they came in and told us what actually happened. We got back in time, to our homerooms in time for, I think, the first tower to fall. But I do remember September 12th was probably the closest that I have ever seen the country as a society, where everybody came together. It didn't matter what your political affiliation was. You had people traveling from thousands of miles away from across the country to go help look for survivors or to try to find bodies or to remove rubble from the site. I mean, it was like an all hands on deck. And if they couldn't make the trip there, they were setting up blood drives and donation stations and everything they could possibly do to help out. Military recruitment skyrocketed after that. All the people that they knew they were going to go to war, but they went and they felt it was their duty that they had to go and help. I cannot say for certain that if 9/11 were to happen tomorrow, that the exact same thing would happen.
It would be concerning, because since then, look at what we've seen. We've seen cities burn. We've seen cities flood. We've seen communities flood and disappear. And yeah, you still get that sense from the Christian community, but you don't see that outpouring around the world. You see it, but not to that level.
Yeah.
So I don't. There was a I can't even remember the guy's name. Maybe it was Grossman or somebody. He blamed all of our violence on video games.
Yeah, I remember the guy. I can't remember his name either.
But there's some truth to that,
Well, if there is a desensitization that goes on for anything, I think it'll happen with video games. Like if you continue to just put yourself in an area where you're seeing violence or you're seeing gore and blood, you're going to get desensitized. I can't talk today. You're going to get used to that. I don't care if you are a soldier and you are in combat. At a certain point, you start getting numb to what you see. Or if you're a teenager playing extremely violent video games, which now it's not even teenagers, they're younger and younger, they're getting used to that. And it's almost to the point where it gets glorified. And I think that was the point that the argument they were trying to make for the Columbine shooters was that they were basically, they wanted to glorify themselves because of what the violence that they were being indoctrinated to from video games and music. They thought it was cool, so they wanted to turn around and get some of that.
The difference is in the real world, you don't respawn in a few minutes and come back in the game.
Yes.
So back to your point, you can see it as a society. You can see it grow in the societies that every day we seem to be drifting further and further away from God. And it's almost acceptable. We had a case of pathologist. I'll never forget. It was had to go to an autopsy on Christmas Day. And one of my partners was there, and the doctor shows up, and it's a professional. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And my partners told him, said, "Hey, Merry Christmas, Doc." And the doc stopped right dead in his tracks. He said, "Only if you believe in that kind of crap." This was a pathologist. So every time I had to go to an autopsy after that, I was always hoping that same guy wasn't there. It wasn't the same doctor. Luckily, he's now not even in our country anymore, and he's moved on with his life. So I don't have to deal with him anymore. Yeah. But that always bothered me, that here's a guy whose sole job, and he was very good at it, is to basically perform autopsies and determine the cause of death on people. And he was a non-believer. And it hurt me thinking, all these families you've helped, and you see them at their worst, and yet you're a non-believer. How can you function in life like that? It's not just everyday folks, it's professional folks. I mean, this guy's obviously very well educated, and if he was that way, it makes you wonder how many others are.
Yeah, and I always attribute this to my own personal worldview, like growing up and being around like-minded people. But I was almost shocked when I moved away for the first time, and I'd start getting around a lot of people from other parts of the country, like just how many non-believers there were. I just assumed growing up, that everybody else was Christian too. And it's naivety, but I was still a kid. But I was still legitimately shocked at just how many people were just non-believers. And like staunch non-believer. Like they want, if they find out you are, they want to try to ruin your day.
Oh yeah.
And it's,
Yeah.
and I don't agree with you, but if you've made that choice for yourself that Christianity is not for you, I mean, we'll respect that choice, but why, I don't understand why people feel like they've got to go and just tear other people down because they might believe, or they still believe, you know, they want to, you know, belittle them for believing. Just move on with your day. You know,
The funniest part about that whole interaction with the doctor was the old lieutenant that was with me was a staunch Christian, and I remember him looking at him and saying, "Man, I'm going to pray for you." And the look on that doctor's face was priceless. And he says, "You don't have to pray for me." He goes, "I know I don't, but I'm going to anyway." And Sean just kind of let it go that, and he and I just kept looking at each other during the autopsy. You know, it's pretty hands-on. You're up close, taking pictures, doing things. Mm-hmm. It's not the best thing in the world to have to do or go through, but I couldn't imagine going through those things and dealing with families at their worst and not being a non-believer. That still bothers me this day, wondering how in the world that guy gets through days.
Yeah.
But it does make me laugh.
I mean, maybe
what
it's
Sean said too.
Maybe it's from like a cynical side. Like they look and they're seeing the evil that comes through, you know, comes across their table. You know, there's a reason why these people are, you know, dead. So they're seeing the evils that other people do. And I don't know if they're just attributing that to the whole argument of like, well, if there's a God, why would he let or bad things happen to these good people type thing? And I think they just let the cynicism creep in, and
it could be,
but I don't know. But then when you take that a step further and you're trying to almost belittle somebody else because they do believe for something as simple as wishing you a Merry Christmas. I mean, all you had to do is say, "Oh, thank you," and just let it go.
Not to just go on the attack mode. Just guy saying Merry Christmas.
So, so one other question I got is, as Christians, going back to the political sphere of things, should Christians be politically neutral? Or is it okay for Christians to lean one way or the other?
My answer to that would be a yes and a no.
I agree.
I think there's times you need to not let your political views shine. But I also think there's times that if you're into politics and if you're going to run for a higher office or whatever that may be, a state rep or a mayor, a city councilman, you should make your views known, because you will be in that position to make a difference in the world, and Christians should count on you. People should count on you, but you know what I mean? If you're running for an elected office and you want to stay on the fence, then stay on the fence. But I think if you were a Christian, you would probably get my support quicker, a lot faster than you were if you weren't.
I think because we agree with that worldview, so
we're more make policies that will better, in my opinion.
Yes.
Make things safer and better for our communities.
Yeah. So biblically, if we're looking to see if, you know, the Bible talks about politics, it does reference not necessarily politics and like specifically, but it does reference political idea or whatever, however you want to say it. But like Jesus speaking of his kingdom not being of this world in John 18:36, it's indicating that we are part of the world, so we are apart from the world, and that as Christians we shouldn't worry ourselves too much about secular political issues. It's also reinforced in Matthew 22:21, where the Pharisees tried to almost trap Jesus and say, "Hey, do you believe that we should be taxed?" And he said, basically, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God. So he's reinforcing to us that we are apart from the secular world. We ultimately belong to God. So politically, we shouldn't try to put our allegiances behind a certain person or a certain ideology. Our allegiances should ultimately belong to God, and then let that affect our worldview. And then that in turn will affect our political leanings. But also in Romans 13, 1-7, Paul is talking to the Romans. He was basically telling them that even though you might not agree with the political environment or whoever's in power, you still need to adhere to what their political guidelines are or their laws or whatever. So politically, our politics is kind of discussed in the Bible. But I think it's pretty clear, like we're not supposed to get super heated about it. And
share that message.
What's that?
You need to share that message more often.
Yeah, and I think we've done pretty well. I think Bill did really well for some of his sermons right there in November or in October leading up to November, when he would discuss politics, or he would, kind of talk about it. And he made that a point, like the focus should be on God. And one thing that I heard around that time, and it kind of put my mind at ease, because I would get almost anxious about, like, because you start listening to the news, whether it be the left leaning or right leaning, whatever you want to listen to. But like you were saying earlier, it's all clickbait now. So what's the best way to get clicks is fear. Play to people's fear. Get people riled up. So they're wanting to fearmonger people into voting a certain way. And so if you listen to some of the rhetoric that was going on, like, well, I would say that entire year leading up to the election, I mean, it's enough. Like, if that's all you focus on,
it was overpowering.
It'll drive you crazy. And I forget who made the video, but I was watching a video one day, and they were discussing that, like, God's going to put into power who he wants to be in power. We really, I mean, as far as like our votes or whatever, we don't necessarily have a say in it. It's whoever's going to be in power is predestined. So, but what we can do is, or we can affect how we live our lives. So if we're living in a godless community, I think God's going to almost punish that by giving us leaders that's going to make our lives a little bit harder. Like, I don't want to say like this or harder, but like, you might be more inclined to have somebody that you don't necessarily believe or agree with, or that isn't looking out for the people's best interests. But if we turn to God and we're praying to him and trying to put the focus back on him, he'll instill a leader that's going to be looking out for what's best for us as a country. And I kind of put my mind at ease, like, it's not really up to me or however many millions of voters out there that are single issue voters, and if they don't agree with one thing, that they're going to vote the other way, or people that are just so uninformed that they're just going to listen to a lie and let that dictate who they vote for. I don't have to worry about the 80 million people or however many that were voting in the election. We just got to turn to God and let God take control. And I mean, ultimately it's going to be his decision anyway. So,
well, there was an old prosecutor that used to say all the time when that was back in my undercover days, there was, you're in the trenches of society a lot of times in that world, and you don't see the best of the, you see things you can't unsee, and you hear things you never unhear, but I remember that there was an old prosecutor. Two things that always shaped me as a young officer. One was a lieutenant that he would have roll call, and then after it was kind of like the old police shows. We still do that. We sit in a room, and the sergeant comes in, or the lieutenant, and he reads all the cases that happened the shift before and stuff, the assignments and details and districts. But every time he was done, we would have prayer session, which is unheard of today. But we would pray before we even hit the street. Now I know some of the younger guys will still get together and have prayer sessions and stuff before they go on the street. But this was, our whole group did it. There was 16 of us every night that prayed together and worked together, all because of one lieutenant. And I remember the old prosecutor, when things got rough and you just start seeing the worst of society, he would always say, well, you won't find swans swimming in a sewer. And that's stuck with me for 20 plus years. There's a lot to be said about that statement. Well, when you do find a swan, you tend to get behind it. You know what I mean? If you think that's the thing that's going to make life better for you, I think that's where people get hung up on let's go, let's support this guy. He's the newest, best, greatest thing. But I agree with what you're saying. It's God's in control. But I also think that God puts people in our lives to make a difference. I'm not saying it's the president. It could be that shift lieutenant.
Yeah.
That it could be that prosecutor that always gives you some old advice.
And I think that's evident throughout the Bible. I mean, how many times has, the Jewish people or the Israelites or whoever it may have been at that time period where they're very devout and then they start to fall off generation by generation to a point where they're just so far away from God that, he basically lets somebody come in, take control, put them into slavery, and then it's usually, one person will come in and that's the person that kind of starts to initiate the change. And then you see the turnaround, like for God's people, they turn back to God and they become free again. And then it's like within a few generations, it's a cycle.
Does it all over again.
Yes. So you can make the argument that, could we be living in the end times and it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse? Yes, you can make that argument, but I think people have been making that argument for
a long time.
I believe every generation has believed that they are the last generation to come, just because of the way that society might be, at least in recent generations.
Could you imagine sitting on this couch with Paul and the wisdom you would get?
That would be very interesting. I don't know if I would. I mean, that'd be some very interesting conversations.
Which it's there for us to still use.
We carry around.
The wisdom's still there, and
yeah.
But just I think about that sometimes when
I don't know if I'd want to read that letter that he would write to the American church right now, though.
No, me neither. I wouldn't either.
I'd be a little hesitant to read that. But going back to your point of, politically, it could be that one person am I saying it's Trump? Not necessarily, but I mean, God's used individuals before to turn around entire nations. So could it be somebody in a political position that, could help bring us back? Yeah. But, I think we need to make sure we're putting our faith and our allegiances behind God instead of a man, and then God will put the right person in the position.
I agree with that. And then, trust me, when I was stationed at the fire department, I sure was praying to get out of there.
Yeah.
And finally, God put the right person in line, and I got moved out. Not that it was bad. Fire department was good to me.
So, and I mean, throughout the Bible, and you can attribute this to your political worldview, but like we're called to live our lives like focus on justice and love and mercy in all aspects of life. So I can definitely see where, at least for me, I take my Christian worldview and what I read from the Bible, and then I let that basically determine what my political leanings are. And I think there's too many people that are kind of doing the opposite. They're like, well, I agree with this political view and this political view and this political view. And even though it might not, or it kind of says something else in the Bible, I'm going to try to twist it and make it fit.
Yeah. You ever find yourself, though, as a Christian, thinking which candidate provides me the best opportunity to be a Christian?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's hard not to. You know what I mean? Which candidate gives me the best opportunity to live life as a Christian and not have to worry about somebody scold me for praying in public, mm-hmm. or my kid praying at school? Which candidate affords me those opportunities? So it's kind of down that same line of what you was just talking about. Does my Christian's belief affect my political views? I would say it does.
Yes. And I think that's, as Christians, I think that's the way it should be. Our Christian beliefs should determine our political leanings. Now, if you're reading the Bible and you're focusing on the charity aspect and the love aspect and, everything, basically everything from the New Testament, like everything that Jesus was teaching us. And if you were to take that and you were to go to apply it politically to yourself, and it makes you lean more left. I mean, I think that's some personal choice. Like you're taking, but you're still using your biblical knowledge to determine your political leanings. Like you're focused more on the mercy aspect and the love aspect, and everything like that. And then there's going to be some that are going to take more like the conservative route of, I think, a lot more of what you're going to find in the Old Testament, and still some of the stuff you find in the New Testament, and they're going to apply it more leaning toward the right. I think that's the appropriate way to do it. I don't think there's a singular right answer. That's got to be an individual decision. But that's still better than taking a worldview, for like a secular worldview, and trying to let that twist and manipulate your religious beliefs. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, I don't think that you're necessarily going to lean a certain decision or a certain way as a Christian, and if you lean the other way, you're 100% wrong. I mean, that all goes back to the free will aspect that God gave us when He created us. He gave us minds and gifts of discernment for a reason. And I think ultimately it's between you and God. But I believe that's still the appropriate avenue to take, is to look inward or look at the Bible and let that dictate everything else, whatever direction that might take you. But there's a lot of people, if you look at more of the extremes, and that's what I'm more focused on, is like the extreme parts of it. If the Bible's, it's directly contradicting what they believe, but they're trying to twist it, manipulate. And these are people of faith. But I think they're letting their politics drive it more than their religious worldview. And I think that's wrong.
I've been lucky enough over the years. I've worked with some politicians, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Different mayors. There's one in particular I'm not going to name, but you would find him at 2 a.m. leaving his church because he couldn't sleep, so he just went in and prayed. And he may have been in there for an hour praying. I mean, this guy was leading our city. To me, that's the guy I want.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I've been unlucky enough to have some of those that would sit across the table from you and cuss at you like he was a drunken sailor. He's the guy I wouldn't want. So I mean, so politically, I think most Christians would choose between those two. You know, it would be a no-brainer who you would want. But it's shocking how many Christians that I know, just because they're Democrats, voted for that guy that would sit across the table and treat you like a dog and yell and scream and cuss, and not the guy that you'd see coming out of the church at 2 a.m. because he
had R next to his name rather than a
yeah, and it was more because it was what was in it for them at the time.
Yeah,
how did it benefit them at the time versus what's the right thing to do? Who's more in line with my Christian beliefs?
Yeah, and I think ultimately, I mean, as Christians, what's our main goal is to spread the gospel and bring souls over to God's kingdom. You want to be able to have the person in power that's going to let you do that,
yes,
rather than somebody who's going to be completely against anything religious.
A perfect example that one particular guy wanted to suspend an officer because he led a public prayer group in uniform, and he wanted him suspended. Well, the other guy would have a prayer breakfast, and encourage every policeman to show up in uniform. So, I mean, there was two different worlds.
Yeah.
You
know? I can say that I can sit here and say, like, it baffles me how people still just have that mindset. Like they want to shut it down at all, like across all avenues. But like, I'm not surprised anymore. Like it used to surprise me that when hearing stories like that. But like I don't know if it's just because it's so commonplace now or if it's just I'm used to it. I don't know, but I shouldn't be able to sit here and not be surprised that that happens, I guess.
We used to live in a world where if you heard a man cuss in front of a woman, you would scold him publicly. Mm-hmm. Now we live in a world where some women talk worse than men, yep, and it's accepted.
Or as a man, and we're trying to hold another man accountable for the way that he's treating either a woman or a child or whatever it is. And then you'll get that other person, that woman, attacking you because you're going after her man. It's
even in school as buddies, and if somebody would say something off the cuff, we were all quick to correct them. Hey, there's a woman. There's a so-and-so's present, or there's a girl present. You don't talk like that. And we all held each other accountable. Not anymore. It's just like it's accepted. And I just truly don't know where that changed or why it changed.
I have a feeling I know why. It's because we're trying to push it's almost a religion now of I'm going to worship me rather than worship God or whatever. I mean, it's not even necessarily Christianity, but like whatever, religion you ascribe to. It's going away from a religious aspect of it, from a higher power to I want to worship me. I'm the center of the world. Nothing else matters. So we're not focused on having the best community possible. We're focused more selfishly, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, Luke could attest to if I heard him say something off the cuff in front of his mom or a woman, he would catch the wrath of his dad. I guarantee you he'd acknowledge that. Even if it wasn't bad, if it's just smart alecky, I wouldn't put up with it. But and nor do I think he should ever allow his child to get away with such.
Yeah.
Because
It's a change in values.
Absolutely.
It's 100% change in values, because that's a value that was instilled in you when you were growing up. You're instilling it in him, and you're hoping that he will one day instill it into his kids. It's that value of accountability. When you don't pass that on, it's not going to take long for it to completely fall away. I mean, within a generation, you don't hold it. If you don't hold one generation accountable, you're ruining everybody beyond that. And I think it's safe to say that we are well past that point of not holding one singular generation accountable, and it's led to multiple generations.
That's why we have
the way we are.
People being burned up on subways and driving cars into a crowd of people,
and just even if somebody does step up and try to help somebody, they are chastised for stepping in to help. And I mean, who are you to help? Or, why would you go in there and hurt that person?
Right.
Because they were trying to hurt somebody else. Well, that's not an excuse.
But I back to your original point there, I think, to me, letting my Christian views affect my political views. You know what I mean? I think, because I gave you two examples of two people that I work for in my career that are totally opposite. And I know good Christian men that supported both. And you wonder why, or how could you support that guy that, is not a good person, definitely not a good Christian. But they did, and that was a lot of it was because of what was in front of his name.
Yeah.
And some of it too is what's in it for me at the time. They're willing to,
I think it's a big thing right now.
Sacrifice their own values for a position, or for some kind of a gain, some political gain of somehow, whether it's get me off afternoons and let me work Monday through Friday job, they're willing to sell themselves and give up for what they believe in just for that. I couldn't do that.
And I think even from a constituent point of view, we're going back to the whole, the selfishness of it. It's what can this person do for me rather than what can they do for the betterment of everybody. So if you're getting promised a bunch of free stuff, that makes it appealing. Well, okay, I'm going to be getting this. I'm going to get money. I'm going to get, internet. I'm going to get phones, or whatever the case may be. That's going to appeal you to that person, rather than, well, let's take a minute and really dive into, what they ascribe to, what are their policies. And we don't do that. I would be scared to know the actual number of people who just vote for somebody and don't know their policies or what their goals are for when they get into office.
Even their Christian beliefs,
Yeah.
Is that important anymore to people in a political campaign?
I think it is.
Are you a
but
Christian
not
or not? Or
it used to be a point where, if you were Catholic, that was almost enough to keep you out of office. Or from a Christian point of view, or if, what was the other one? I was thinking of another sect or religion that if you were to come out as that, you would have no chance of making or winning any political office. just because we are deeply rooted in our Christian beliefs, and we wanted to have a leader that shared the same faith as us. But it's completely gone away from that. And it's just people don't hold that as an important attribute in what they're looking for as a leader, unfortunately.
I agree with that. That's you gotta. To me, I think it's important that I would want to know those things.
Yes,
but the politics in today's world it's almost comical, really, because a lot of it is about the clickbait, and it's also about what can they do for me. I can tell you which candidate would benefit me the best, the most, which one would allow me to live more free in my Christian beliefs and my Christian lifestyle. And I could tell you which one would infringe on that. And those are the things that are important to me, but I also like to know which one's going to tax me to death and which one's not. We're also business owners. So,
yeah,
it's crazy how much a small business gets stomped. It's absolutely insane how much they get stomped with taxes. It's never ending. I never knew it was that bad. I can't say I was anti-government because I can't say I was ever anti-government, but I do lean a little bit right.
Yeah.
Owning a business kind of almost makes you a little more anti-government because you're like, tearing up my equipment, getting to my place of business.
Yeah.
On the roads you're taxing me to be on. It gets overbearing. So politically, I want to know which one's going to let me live my lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And I want to know which one's going to allow me to live my lifestyle in the best form, the best way possible. I don't know does that make sense?
Yeah. I think ultimately as Christians, we need to focus on the religious aspect of it, of who's going to let us live as Christians the freest, who's going to let us be able to not just live out our Christian beliefs, but like be able to spread the gospel without any repercussions.
Right.
We're called to spread the word of God, but we can't be afraid of what's going to happen if we do. We shouldn't be afraid of what's going to happen if we do. But in America, there ultimately shouldn't be any repercussions for doing something like spreading the gospel. And I think we're getting to that point where you're seeing people getting put in prison or put in jail because they're out open air preaching on the street. And, and that's all attributed to who is in power politically in that city or that municipality. But as a country, you're going to see it on a larger scale if you have the wrong person in power. So yes, ultimately, their religious leanings are important to me because that's going to tell me who's going to let me live as a Christian the freest. But then I also look after that at who's going to let me live as an American the freest.
Right.
Those are like the two biggest things I look at as far as like a political leader. So yeah, definitely what you were saying, it definitely makes sense to me. And I don't know, I think we're already getting taxed enough, but I couldn't imagine as like in a small business owner, and especially like in the restaurant business, it's
never ending.
Yeah. I mean, you're getting taxed on stuff that you're already getting taxed on, and then they're going to add tax to that. And it's so let's move on. Like, as we're wrapping up here, we'll go back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, as far as having those discussions with people politically. And I think as a Christian, there's some things that you can do to make that, to either initiate the conversation or to actually have the conversation a lot more amicably. Something that I always talk to people, like if the topic of politics ever comes up, and if I don't know what they believe, or if I know that they kind of lean more toward the opposite of what I believe, I'm like, okay, we can have this discussion. But the minute that like it starts turning combative, or if you start getting disrespectful in any way, then it's done. We're just going to shut it off. It's like, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to sit there and have a civil conversation with somebody that you disagree with. So that's what I always start out with. And usually it kind of brings down the tone. Because there's a lot of people, they want to go in there and they'll have a more heated agenda. We'll just say, like, they want to do like the gotcha points and stuff like that. But as long as you shut it down right from the get go, then usually they'll either say, okay, well, it's not even worth it, or you'll have the discussion, and it usually leads to some pretty good discussions. But some more tips for especially men that are wanting to have this political discussion. Biggest thing you need to do is, I say, pray for guidance, right? You're going to be, as a Christian, we have been given the gift of the Holy Spirit. So if you pray for guidance, you're going to feel convicted one way or the other, whatever way the Holy Spirit wants to lead you. So pray for that guidance, and then just lean into the conviction. That's what I would say. So pray for guidance, pray for your community, and then pray for your political leaders, and not for the political leaders that you agree with. I would say all political leaders, because it doesn't matter if you agree with them or not, they're in power. Right. So
Fact. Have you been to D.C. lately?
I have never been to D.C., unfortunately.
What's a cesspool right now?
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's not just the Democrats or the Republicans. It's all of them.
Yeah.
I go every year. We've gone for the last 8 years, Luke?
Somewhere like that, yeah.
Probably the last 8 years we go every May. And over those 8 years, you can just see it decline. I mean, there's a little Chinatown I always enjoyed walking through there to go to the Walgreens. And last year when we were there was 2 armed guards there.
In Chinatown?
In Chinatown, with full vests, assault rifles, and Walgreens. Because they were getting robbed so many times in a day that they hired their own, basically their own militia.
Yeah.
The Walgreens militia was in there, so to speak. But I can tell you this, our political leaders, our country, us, we all need more prayer. I mean, there's no way around that.
Yeah.
No way around it. And I always, on your advice that you gave for people, even my relatives and my closest friends and that are very liberal, they all know I love them to death. And I'd do anything in the world for them. Mm-hmm. We may not agree politically. We don't fight and scream and yell. But we're different. We disagree. But if I need help, they'll be there in a minute to help me. If they need help, they know I'll be there.
Yeah.
And I think the world of them. I love them to death. I could hear one of them, and when he hears this, is going to be all over me. And he's an older guy. We were former partner, and I talk to him 2-3 times a week. Very progressive liberal.
Yeah.
Completely opposite of the spectrum than me, but I think the world of him. Mm-hmm. And likewise. I love him so much. My son's named after him, his middle name. So just because somebody's on a different political spectrum than you, don't mean you can't be brothers.
Yeah. And that goes back to what we were talking about, like, just, it's okay to disagree. That's the whole point of having these conversations. You find out who you agree with, who you disagree with. You might be enlightened to some information, or to, a certain part of the worldview that you didn't know about before. And, it might kind of help change your mind. And that goes for both ends of the spectrum.
And Michael and I both did agree on one thing, is they're all nuts.
They're all nuts. Every single one of them. A couple other things you can do is, I think it's our duty as citizens, we need to stay informed politically. Don't just show up to vote on election day and pull that lever for that R or for that D or whatever it is that you ascribe to, but like stay informed to the policies. If it might not be every single person on that ballot, but you need to look at the definitely the bigger ones, the ones that are going to have the most power, the most say in how we're going to be able to live our lives. Stay informed of their policies and see if that aligns with your worldview as a Christian first, and then your worldview politically. But on the flip side, stay informed, but do not get consumed by politics. Because in the end, like you were saying, they're all nuts. But in the end, our ultimate goal needs to be to focus on God and to furthering his kingdom. And we can't do that if we're taking our focus off of God and focusing on the secular political environment. And lastly, I would say, just like you were just saying, remain respectful. I think respect goes a long way when you're talking with somebody that you disagree with, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Because I mean, you could be on the exact opposite end of the political spectrum. You just treat them with respect. You know, they might be combative, but you're taking all their ammo away from them if you're just sitting there respectful. And then it might change their mind of like, well, I thought all Democrats were stupid, or I thought all Republicans were racist, and whatever it is, just remain respectful and just be willing to listen to their viewpoints instead of just shutting them down and shouting. Those are the biggest things that I can suggest. You guys have anything to add?
I'm good.
Luke, you've been awful quiet over there today, bud.
I was just letting you guys talk this time.
Yeah, so.
Is it because his dad's here?
Yeah, you just don't want to say anything to embarrass him. No. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I think we're all blessed to attend a church that, honestly, I couldn't tell you what Bill's political affiliations are, and that's refreshing in itself. I wouldn't even want to guess.
Yeah.
And I don't need to. So, I mean, that's a blessing in itself. But I do think when you're in a crowd, don't just assume everyone's political beliefs are the same as yours. Mm-hmm. Just be respectful of others. Yeah. That could go a long way.
Now, before we leave, I do have one question. I just thought about this for Luke. Like, as far as the younger generation, do you see a disconnect from politics, or are they starting to maybe be more engaged?
I'd say definitely more engaged. A lot of it is social media. Definitely allows people to engage with it more. Sometimes that's not for the good either.
Yeah.
So a little bit about Luke is growing up, he had the same set of friends from like first grade on. Mm-hmm. And now he's almost 22. That same set of friends are still there. And there's of that group, I know their dads too, and some of them are pretty far right, but there's one that I know he's still really close with. His dad and him are very, very progressive liberals. And does that affect your guys' friendship? I know you guys poke at each other, but
no, not at all.
So
now, was a friendship there before? Well, I mean, obviously for you, like, and him, I guess, because
they grew up together.
That you grew up together.
Yeah.
But like, say you knew if you didn't grow up together, would that affect how you saw your friend, or?
No, not at all.
Okay. So it just shows you, I mean, even the younger generation, even though we're getting stupider as each generation, no offense, Luke. just joking. But no, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you lean or to what extreme. you treat each other with respect, and you can get along with whoever. And as a society, I mean, ultimately society is going to benefit from it. But also from a Christian perspective, you're showing the love of Christ when we're talking to people. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, show the love of Christ, spread the gospel, and win souls. So just treat each other with respect, regardless of political leanings, and just don't get consumed by secular issues. And just remember that God's got it at the end. So
some days it's hard.
Yeah.
Not to be consumed when it's all you see over and over and over, especially this last election I flip between liberal media and conservative media, and one of them I'm like, what? How did you guys come to that conclusion? And you're watching the same story and you're like, it's the same set of facts, but two complete different stories or two complete different outcomes.
Yeah. It got to the point where this year, like I had to shut everything off, like podcasts or YouTube channels or whatever else I was watching. If it had to do with politics, I essentially had to shut it off because it was getting to the point where like it's getting ridiculous. I'm, starting to feel consumed by it, and that shouldn't be what is taking my entire focus. But all right, well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up, unless you guys have anything else to add right here at the end. All right, well, thanks for coming on, Bruce. I appreciate it. And until next time, we'll see you guys later.